I love a good story. I really do. I love a good story. There's just nothing that beats a good story. It's something you remember, it's something you hold on to, it's something you learn from. And so I really do enjoy when somebody, especially if it's a good storyteller, and then you get this really good story, and you put those two together, it's just about as good as it gets. Tell me some stories about the great miracles of Elisha. The king told to Gehazi. Wow. This wasn't yesterday. It's been a few days ago. Elisha was one of the prophets in the Old Testament that had received, he had been mentored by Elijah and had received a double portion of Elijah's anointing. And the king says, I know you were Elisha's servant. Tell me some stories about Elisha. So Gehazi begins to tell all the stories of the great miracles that Elisha had done, and he starts like this maybe. He says, I remember the time when Elisha took the mantle of Elijah, and he struck the water, and the Jordan River just like parted, and he walked across it on dry ground, and all the prophets that were standing on the bank of the river there said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. And then he continues, he says, I remember another time when the king of Israel, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom, they were all on their way to battle the king of Moab, which was the big, bad dude. But after marching for a week, their horses, everything was so dry, they had nothing to drink. Even the animals were being thirsty and were not going to be able to continue. And so they were close to where Elisha was, and so they came and asked Elisha for help. And Elisha told those kings to make a valley full of ditches, that God's going to send some rain and for your animals. And matter of fact, Elisha told him this is going to be so easy for God to deal with that he's just going to help you beat your enemies with this process too. And sure enough, Gehazi just keeps talking and says, sure enough, once those kings started digging ditches, it started raining, and there was water enough for the people and the horses. And then when the sun came up, the light shined, the sun shined, something made some kind of reflection, did something. And Moab, the king of Moab was so and his army was so disoriented, they defeated the enemy. And Gehazi continues, he says, I remember another time when the commander of the Armenian army, he was a fellow named Naaman. He showed up at Elisha's house one day, and he wanted Elisha to heal him of leprosy, and he had brought his life's fortune to pay Elisha to heal him, but Elisha didn't even go out to meet him. He just sent me out, Gehazi says, and to tell him to go and wash himself 7 times. Remember that number, 7 times in the Jordan River. But I remember Naaman was so mad that I thought he was going to walk all the way back to Aram. But he finally, cooler heads prevailed, and he went to the Jordan River, and he dipped once and twice and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times, and nothing happened, but he dipped the 7th time. And the work was complete. His leprosy was gone. And then Gehazi continues, but I love the story about this wealthy woman who lived in Shunammite, which is about 10 miles north of Nazareth. And Elisha got to know her because she invited us to have dinner at her house one day. And so we were going through, and so she was nice to us. And she was so nice that Elisha liked her so much that when we had the famine just 7 years ago, there's that word again, 7 years ago, he told her to take her family and to leave town. And so she moved to the land of the Philistines, which aside for us today would be Gaza Strip. But that's not the coolest part of the story, King. Here's the best part of the story. She had a son who died, and Elisha brought the boy back to life. As Gehazi was telling this story to the king, these stories to the king, at that very moment, the mother of the boy that had been raised from the dead walked up to the king to make her appeal to the king to get her house and land back. You see, while she was gone, some other people took over land, and they had settled in there, and she was having trouble. They wouldn't let her have her property back and her house back. And so, as that story is going on, and he looks around and sees her, he says, "Look, my lord the king, here is this woman now, and this is her son, the very one that Elisha brought back to life." And the king asked her, "Is this true?" And so she told him the story of her life. The story that I've just told is from 2 Kings chapter 8. You're welcome to go back and read that. It's a great story. But she tells the story from from 2 Kings chapter 4 that starts with verse 8. Let's read it. One day, Elisha went to Shunammite. A rich woman lived there. She urged him to eat something. So whenever he passed by, he would stop in and eat some food. And she said to her husband, "Look, I know that he is a holy man of God, and he passes by regularly. So let's make a small room on the roof. We'll set up a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him there. Then when he comes to us, he can stay there." Here's a woman, I think, who had the gift of hospitality, right? You know, she probably was one of those women who just was persons who just always invited people to come over for a meal. Probably she was one of those. You know them, right? Maybe some of you are one of those. And you know that the person who, if an extra person shows up, you don't just go into like hysterics and just or have a meltdown. You just say, "Let's find another chair and pull up here on the corner." One of those people say, there never can be too many people around, and let's just have a good time together. She was one of those. And here's the thing about hospitality. Hospitality has always been a cherished virtue among God's people. It has. God always, matter of fact, when the Israelites got in trouble, it was often because they refused to be hospitable. And I think we should take hospitality very seriously as Christians in our own lives, when we're dealing with individuals as individuals, but it's also when we're dealing with other people as a church. For instance, we have guests today, and those guests today probably in the first 7 minutes of walking into our building decided if they will ever come back today based on our hospitality. And I really appreciate those of you who are willing to be at the doors and greet and have that smile and remind people that there's a little tea and there was a donut until Jeff ate it, that day. And I appreciate people who serve as ushers and greet people as they come in. I think that's an important part of who we are as a church, for us to be welcoming and hospitable, always including everyone. I think that's important. It helps us. It helps others to feel at home in what we consider our church. See, because when we offer hospitality to a new person, then something happens. New friendships are formed. We start finding out about other people. Our lives get bigger. I heard one time today, in the last 2 weeks, I've been asking teachers, I've been asking them, "Are you ready for school to start?" And only one out of 2 weeks as a person said yes. And I looked at him and told him he was lying. And I was right, wasn't I? Yeah, I got to know him pretty well. No, you see, when we offer hospitality to a new person, our friendships are formed and our lives get bigger. It's great to have us and me and my 5. It's a great thing. But it's even more awesome when it gets to be me and my 7 or me and my 10, or we just get to have this awesome time because we're welcoming and other people want to be a part of what we're doing. This woman that was so good at hospitality, she was so hospitable and loved what the prophet was doing, Elisha was doing, that she even built him a room on the second floor of her house. She did a house renovation for one guest. It wasn't a guest room. It was a prophet's quarters. It was something that she did for this particular person, this man of God. And this woman's hospitality extended to her stewardship. You know, she had decided she wanted to use the resources they had to honor and bless the prophet and to do the work of God. You know, and here's what we do, guys. We give to the people, to the ministries, and to the God whom we love. That's what we do with what we have. We give to God because it makes us a part of what God is doing in our lives, what God is doing throughout the church, and what God is doing in Bartlesville, our communities, what God is doing in Uganda, what God is doing in Costa Rica. When we give, it makes us a part of that. That's part of the reason we give. That's a wonderful reason to do it. But this Shunammite woman, she wanted to be a part of what God was doing through Elisha, and so she provided him a place. But there's more to this story of the woman who had it all in her life. You know, the story immediately prior to this story is Elisha coming to the house of a poor woman who had absolutely nothing, who her sons were getting ready to be sold into slavery so that her debts could be paid. She had lost her husband. She couldn't make a living. And Elisha had prayed and given her the opportunity to make a living for the rest of her life, even provided for her retirement, it says. And then the story continues, and it comes to this one of this woman. But in the life of somebody that has it all, and in the story of our lives, when we look around, it looks like we're people who basically have it all. There's still, in our community, there's a lot of hidden pain. There's still a lot of hidden pain. So let's continue the story. Let's see what's going on. So one day, this is starting in verse 11. So one day Elisha came there. He headed to the room on the roof. This was where he was, and he laid down. And he said to his servant Gehazi, "Call the Shunammite woman." And Gehazi called her, and she stood before him. Elisha then said to Gehazi, now remember, she's standing right there, okay? She's standing at the doorway, and she says to Gehazi, say to her, she's right there listening to him, say to her, look, you've gone to all this trouble for us. What can I do for you? Is there anything that I can say on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? And she responded, she said, I'm content to live at home with my own people. Now, just an aside for a moment. What do you get a woman that has everything? Now, in the first service, somebody suggested jewelry. And so she is in need of nothing, she says. But Elisha wants to bless her for her hospitality. And so as we continue the story, he asks Gehazi, so what can be done for her? So she's gone now, and so he says to his servant Gehazi, what can be done for her? And Gehazi says, well, she doesn't have a son, and her husband is old. Now, remember that in our day, that's not a big deal. In that day, it was a big deal because women, there were limited amount of things they could do in the market, and so they couldn't have certain things and do certain things, and so it was really important to have a child, really, really important if you could have a son, so that you could live with them and stay with them till you died. And so it was very, very important that she did not have a child. Verse 15 says, Elisha said, call her. So Gehazi calls her back again, and she stood at the door, and Elisha said, this time he talks to her. He says, about this time next year, you will be holding a son in your arms. But she said, no, man of God, sir, don't lie to your servant. Wow. But the woman conceived and gave birth to a son about the same time the next year. This was what Elisha had promised her. Here's the thing. Nobody has a perfect life, right? Nobody has a perfect life. Now, let's get my phone out here. Nobody's life really looks like what we think it looks like when we get on Facebook and we start scrolling up through there and we see that all of their friends came to a party. It had to be the best party that ever was, because everybody's smiling and they're all standing there. They're best friends. They're getting along. There are no issues. They're just a bunch of really good people having the most awesome time of their lives. And last time we got together with our friends, they fought, right? And we scroll on down and we see that, wow, that person's, their children and grandchildren all gathered together. And another time, there is no sibling quarreling going on there, because look at the smiles on their faces. And those grandkids, even though they're teenagers, they just look like angels, right? You can tell by the smiles on their face that they've never talked back to a parent or a grandparent in their entire lives. Nobody has a perfect life where nothing goes wrong, where there's never a loss, and where sorrow does not visit that life. It just doesn't happen. The Shunammite woman must have experienced the disappointment of barrenness, or not being able to have a child, and possibly some miscarriages, which would have been quite prevalent in those days. And my guess is that she had given up on the dream of having children, because, like I said, it was very important that you had children in that day and age. More specifically, a son, which really was the mark of being a successful woman in that day, was if you had a son that would take care of you in your old age. But apparently, over the years, she had come to terms with her life, and she had given up on having children, and she had lost hope that would take place. Now, what about, have you ever had a dream that didn't come true? Have you ever had that? You worked hard, you played by all the rules, and you knew you were up for the job promotion, and then you didn't get it? Or maybe you put yourself out there for someone else, and but you still haven't found that special someone, or the person you thought was the special someone has rejected you. Or maybe for your life, maybe as you and your spouse have tried everything to have a child, you've been to fertility specialists, and you've prayed and you prayed and prayed, and it just hasn't happened. It hurts to hope when your hopes don't come true. So sometimes it's just easier to stop hoping and to accept things the way they are. And maybe apparently that's what the Shunammite woman did. She accepted her life. She embraced her blessings. Now, she wasn't bitter. We can see that she wasn't bitter, but she had accepted her life with the things that she wasn't going to have, and she embraced her blessings. She stopped speaking about her hope of bearing a child, and especially a son. So Elijah, when he told her that she would have a child, it brings that back into play. It cannot be comfortable. And she responds from the lack of hope in her life. But then he's born. He's born. He's perfect, and he starts growing up. And he's the person that she always was afraid to dream that he would be. Those years when she was younger and she had dreamed about having a child, this was it. This was the Facebook child. He was awesome. Let's continue our story. Verse 18. The child grew up, let me say probably 8, 9 years old, maybe 10. And one day he ran to his father, who was with the harvest workers, and he said to his father, "Oh, my head, my head." The father said to a young man, probably a servant, "Carry him to his mother." So he picked up the boy, brought him to his mother, and the boy sat on her lap until noon. Then he died. She went up, laid him down on the bed for the man of God. Then she went out and closed the door. Your hopes are dashed, they're renewed, and then they're squashed flat. But here's this woman. When the boy tragically died on his mother's lap, of maybe a brain aneurysm, it could have been anything, but this woman did not lose faith this time. She carried her son to the prophet's chamber. She shut the door to halt the process of death. Now, not physically. Let me tell you what would happen in that day. When a person died, they immediately started the process of burial. Now remember, 3 days, Lazarus had already been dead and in the tomb for a few days and stunk already, right? That's what they said. Jesus, the only reason Jesus was not buried on the day he died was because it got so late that they refused to do that. They buried him quickly, but they would have maybe gone to the next day, maybe, when he would have been buried, but it was Sabbath. And so, this was a very quick thing that they would do, but she takes the son, she puts him in this holy, what she would consider a holy place, and she shuts the door to halt the process of death. Halt the husband and the women from the community from coming and preparing the body and putting his body in a grave. Let's continue the story. Verse 22. She called her husband and said, "Send me one of the young men and one of the donkeys so that I can hurry to the man of God and come back." And her husband said, "Why are you going to him today? It's not a new moon or Sabbath." In other words, it's not the day we go to church, babe. You got your days mixed up. And she said, "Don't worry about it." I'm not going to ask us guys how many times our wives have told us, "Don't worry about it. They'll take care of it." Hopefully that happens a few times. But she said, "Don't worry about it." She saddled the donkey. Then she said to her young servant, "Drive the donkey hard and don't let me slow down unless I tell you." So she went off and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. As soon as the man of God saw her from a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, it's the Shunammite woman. Run out and meet her and ask her, 'Are things okay with you, your husband, and your child?'" And she said, "Things are okay." Verse 27, but when she got to the man of God at the mountain, she grabbed his feet. And Gehazi came to push her away. Remember seeing this in the Bible anywhere else? Remember, children would come to Jesus and they tried to push her away. But the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is distraught." Listen, but the Lord has hidden the reason from me, and she hasn't told me why. Let me do an aside here real quick. Chad and I, in all of our years of ministry, we try to be men of God. We try to live lives in a way that would be pleasing to God, and we've given our lives to do full-time ministry. But I can't remember a single time that I went up to the hospital to visit somebody just because God told me they were there. If you don't tell us you're there, we don't know. Just like this guy, right? Even Elisha, that's raising people from the dead, somebody had to tell him. So just a reminder, if you have to go to the hospital for something, have a sickness or something, and you wonder why we didn't come see you, if you didn't tell us, that would be the reason, okay? Just like Elisha. I'm just telling you. Elisha's had the same issue we have. The Lord had hidden the reason from me, he says, and hasn't told me why. Then verse 28, but she said, "Did I ask for a son, sir?" Now she's jumping on him, right? Did I ask for a son? Didn't I say, "Don't raise my hopes"? But Elisha said to Gehazi, "Get ready, take my staff and go. If you encounter anyone, don't stop and greet them. If anyone greets you, don't reply. Put my staff on the boy's face." But the boy's mother said, "I swear by your life and my Lord's life, I won't leave you." So Elisha got up and followed her. Now Gehazi went on ahead of them. He set the staff on the young boy's face, but there was no sound, no response. So he went back to meet Elisha and told him the boy didn't wake up. So from Shunem to Mount Carmel, it's about 35 miles, give or take. A person walking in that day at normal pace and normally would get about 15 miles in per day. If she had a donkey and if they were hurrying and the servant was young, they might have made it in what was left of that day. Remember, the boy didn't even die till noon, and then they've got to get the donkey, get everything ready to go, head out. A couple of days there, a couple of days back. A couple of days there. She gets there and she falls on the ground. She takes hold of Elisha's feet and persuades him to come with her to offer life to her dead son. To me, when I read this in the story, it was just a great reminder that when we experience tragedies in our life, that we need to put our faith and our trust in God, who is able to bring healing in our lives, that's able to bring redemption from even the deepest pains. And so I encourage you, if there's something in your life today, to ask God to bring new life to the dead situations that you're facing. Because God can do that. It hasn't happened yet in this story. But we got some more story to go. Let's continue. We're in verse 32. Elisha came into the house and saw the boy laying dead on the bed. He went in and closed the door behind the two of them, and then he prayed to the Lord. He got up on the bed and lay down on top of the child, putting his mouth on the boy's mouth, his eyes on the boy's eyes, his hands on the boy's hands. And as he bent over him, the child's skin grew warm. Then Elisha got down and paced back and forth in the house. And once again, he got up on the bed and bent over the boy, at which point the boy sneezed 7 times. There's that number again, 7 times, and opened his eyes. Elisha called for Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." And Gehazi called her, and she came to Elisha, and he told her, "Pick up your son." She came and fell at his feet, face down on the ground. Then she picked up her son and left. See, when Elisha arrived, he did what he had seen his mentor Elijah do. He had done the same thing. He had laid down on a person face to face. And then he prayed to the Lord just as Elijah had, and he placed himself on the body, and he prayed again, and he stretched himself out again on the child, and this time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. God worked through Elisha to lift the boy from death to life. And Elisha gave this boy back to his mother. Let me say, I've told you about 7. Remember this, this woman has been for 7 years. She was in the Gaza Strip in the land of the Philistines because they were having a 7-year drought. The boy sneezed 7 times. Throughout Old Testament especially, you'll see the number 7 happen a lot. And the reason they do it's a number of completeness or perfection. So it would be like saying, "I'm glad you did that. I told you 1,000 times and you finally did it." In other words, I told you until you did that, right? Or, "I bet I've done that 1,000,000 times and it finally happened." And so 7 was the number of completeness. And so the boy sneezed until whatever it was that from him being dead for 3 to 4 days came unlodged or cleared or whatever until the completeness of that, and he could breathe and have life in his body again. She was in the Gaza Strip until the drought was complete, and it became the rain times when rain would fall again, and she could have make her living in her land. So that's the reason for the number 7. It's a number they used in the Old Testament for completeness or perfection. But my question for you today is this: how have you experienced God's resurrection power in your life? How have you experienced that? What has happened in your life that has made it so that you understand for sure and it's real to you? And with school starting back up, I know this, kids come back and teachers come back. You got all these hundreds of kids and teachers and everybody gathering around in these small spaces and closed-in rooms and stuff, and everybody starts sharing germs and all the stuff that happens when school starts back up. And let me invite you to pray in the next few weeks for our kids, our teachers, our administrators, all of those in the schools. Because as they go back to school, it's going to be again. And here's another thing. For maybe you know somebody that has a child that could use prayer. Maybe it's your own child. Maybe you know of your own family life. And so let me just invite you the next week or two to pray for children, or maybe you know a person, a mom or dad that's lost a child, and maybe it's just something we need to do, or you feel like you need to do at this point, and I invite you to pray for them. Okay. So when this story that the Shunammite woman was telling the king ended, this is a story she told the king. She made sure, or the king made sure that everything that had been hers before was restored to her. He made sure that the 7 years of drought, that all the money that was made on that land was restored to her, that all the crops and the income, that all that was restored to her. And so I think that because she was hospitable, God found a way to bless her, not once, but twice. So for us today, you have a story to tell about what God has done in your life. Every one of us has a story about what God has done. So have you told your story? I've heard some good stories lately from some of you. It's awesome. See how God works. Have you told your story lately? Is there something that you've shared lately about what God is doing? Here's the thing. We are not in a drought of information in our world, right? We're an information glut. I mean, you can get any information on anything you want at the snap of your finger, basically. But people are looking for relationships, and if there's somebody you're in a relationship with and you can share your story with them, that in itself can restore their faith. Maybe it can renew their dream. So won't you tell your story? Won't you tell it?